Why did the internet decide that saying the wrong sentence is more unforgivable than doing the wrong thing? Think about it. Careers don't end because of crimes anymore. They end because of phrasing. A joke told 10 years too early, a word chosen half a second too slow, a thought expressed without the correct disclaimer, footnote, and apology preloaded. No victims, no broken laws, just a sentence that didn't survive the screenshot era. And once that sentence exists, it doesn't matter who you are. Talent doesn't save you, intent doesn't save you, context doesn't save you. The clip circulates, the outrage locks in, and suddenly, your entire character is reverse engineered from one imperfect moment. Stay till the end, because this isn't about being held accountable. It's about a culture addicted to moral execution, where saying the wrong thing is treated as proof of who you really are, and silence is the only remaining form of safety. The surface image of this phenomenon looks deceptively clean. No police reports, no court dates. No victims telling their story on camera, just a screenshot, a clip, a quote ripped from a longer conversation and frozen in time like a crime scene with no body. It usually begins quietly. A podcast clip circulates, a stand-up joke from years ago resurfaces, an old tweet is rediscovered by someone who wasn't even part of the original audience. The tone is rarely explosive at first. It's inquisitive. Is this okay? Why isn't anyone talking about this? Moral concern arrives disguised as curiosity. Then the framing shifts. Headlines don't say controversial joke or awkward phrasing. They say problematic. And that single word does a lot of work. It doesn't accuse you of doing something illegal. It accuses you of being something wrong. Intent becomes irrelevant. Context becomes suspicious. Time becomes meaningless. The sentence is judged as if it were spoken today, to today's standards by today's audience, even if none of that is true. Social media accelerates the transformation. Screenshots flatten nuance. Clips remove buildup. Algorithms reward certainty, not doubt. Outrage travels faster than explanation ever could. By the time the person involved responds, the narrative has already hardened into something moral, not factual. This is where the surface image becomes unsettling. On the outside, it looks like accountability.
Holding hands while the walls come tumbling down. When they do, I'll be right there.
You'll notice what's missing. No one is asking what harm actually occurred. No one is asking who was affected. The conversation isn't about repair, it's about positioning who is morally aligned and who isn't. The media plays its part perfectly. Coverage rarely examines the substance of the statement. It focuses on reaction. Backlash erupts. Fans divided. Internet slams. The story becomes about the outrage itself, not the words that triggered it. Attention shifts from meaning to momentum, and momentum demands escalation. Public figures learn this quickly. You can watch the shift in real time. Early interviews are loose, human, imperfect. Later ones are sterile. Sentences get longer, safer, padded with disclaimers. Jokes disappear. Opinions flatten. Everything is pre-approved by PR, legal, and an invisible committee of imagined critics. Not because people became wiser, but because the cost of misalignment became too high. The surface image tells us this is progress. That society is becoming more thoughtful, more inclusive, more careful with language. And sometimes that's true. But there's another truth sitting just beneath it. Fear. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of being clipped, fear of being interpreted in bad faith, fear that one wrong phrase could undo years of work. That fear doesn't create better conversations. It creates quieter ones, safer ones, empty ones. And audiences feel it even if they can't name it. Interviews feel rehearsed, statements feel hollow, apologies feel robotic. Everyone sounds like they're reading from the same script because in a way they are. A script designed not to express truth but to survive the timeline. What's most striking is how rarely the outrage leads to anything constructive. There's no path forward, no criteria for redemption, no agreement on what better even looks like, just a demand for removal, silence, disappearance. Once the sentence is declared unforgivable, the person attached to it becomes disposable.
And that's the surface illusion. It looks like moral clarity. It feels like justice. But it operates more like a spectacle, fast, addictive, and emotionally satisfying in the moment. A hit of righteousness, a shared sense of superiority, a temporary feeling of control in a chaotic world. Because judging someone else's words is easier than examining our own. And once you see that, the next layer becomes impossible to ignore the mythology that keeps this cycle alive. The mythology behind all of this is elegant, seductive, and deeply flawed. It tells us that language is destiny, that the words someone uses are a direct window into their soul, that a single sentence extracted from context and frozen in time can reveal everything we need to know about who a person really is. No patterns required, no history considered, no room for contradiction. In this myth, morality becomes linguistic. Good people speak correctly, bad people slip up. Intent doesn't matter because intent can be lied about. Growth doesn't matter because growth is inconvenient to track. Context doesn't matter because context slows things down. What matters is alignment, saying the right thing in the right way at the right moment to the right audience. Miss any part of that equation and you're no longer just wrong, you're suspect. This is how language turns into a loyalty test. Public figures aren't expected to behave ethically anymore. They're expected to signal ethics fluently. Quotes are memorized, phrases are recycled, apologies follow templates. Everyone knows the correct order of words that prove you're one of the good ones. And the moment someone deviates from that script, the deviation itself becomes evidence. What's ironic is how quickly this myth replaces actual moral inquiry. Instead of asking, did this cause harm, the question becomes, did this sound wrong? Instead of who was affected, we ask, how did Twitter react? The evaluation of character collapses into the evaluation of tone. Ethics becomes aesthetic. And aesthetics are easy to police. This myth thrives because it gives people something simple in a complicated world. Clear villains, clear heroes, clear rules. If someone says the wrong thing, we don't have to wrestle with ambiguity. We don't have to sit with discomfort. We don't have to accept that decent people can say clumsy, outdated, or poorly worded things. We can just decide, quickly, collectively, publicly. That decisiveness feels powerful. Online moral judgment becomes participatory. Anyone can join, anyone can screenshot, anyone can declare offense on behalf of others. The more certain the condemnation, the more virtuous it appears. Doubt starts to look like complicity. Nuance starts to look like excuse-making. So the mythology reinforces itself. Creators learn to speak in sanitized language. Jokes are replaced with disclaimers. Opinions are hedged until they say nothing at all. Interviews become exercises in survival. Authenticity gets traded for safety. Not because people stopped having thoughts, but because thinking out loud became dangerous. And the audience adapts too. Viewers learn to listen not for meaning, but for mistakes. They watch with one finger on the screenshot button waiting for the slip. Engagement doesn't come from understanding, it comes from catching. From being the first to say, "Did you hear?" that moral vigilance becomes entertainment. This is where the mythology turns cruel, because once language is treated as identity, there's no room for error, no margin for awkwardness, no allowance for learning in public. The only acceptable path is perfection, and perfection is impossible for anyone who isn't silent. Which explains the final contradiction at the heart of this myth. The culture claims to value honesty, growth, and accountability, but it punishes honesty when it's imperfect. It discourages growth by denying time, and it replaces accountability with spectacle. The safest option isn't to be better, it's to be invisible. That's not moral progress, it's moral theater. And once you recognize that, the next question becomes unavoidable: who actually benefits from a system where silence is safer than sincerity? The moment saying the wrong thing becomes a public crime, a new kind of power quietly takes over. Not the power to judge actions, but the power to define meaning. Once a sentence escapes into the wild, it no longer belongs to the person who said it. It belongs to whoever can frame it most convincingly as unforgivable. This is where the real damage begins, because this culture doesn't punish harm, it punishes imperfection. And imperfection is far easier to manufacture than wrongdoing. A joke clipped out of context, a phrase spoken before the cultural rules updated, a word that used to be acceptable now radioactive. None of these require intent. None require victims. All they require is circulation. The mechanics are brutally efficient. A clip surfaces, often years old, often mundane. It's framed not as awkward or outdated, but as revealing, proof of who someone really is. Commentary accounts amplify it. Headlines reduce it to a single adjective, problematic. And once that word is attached, the verdict feels pre-written. Explanation sounds defensive. Context sounds suspicious. Silence sounds guilty. But wait, here's the detail that rarely gets questioned. In many of these cases, no one can clearly articulate what the harm actually was. There is outrage but no injury, condemnation but no repair. The punishment isn't restitution, it's reputational erasure. Loss of platform, loss of income, loss of legitimacy, all justified by the idea that a sentence exposed a hidden moral defect. This is how language becomes a proxy for character. Platforms make this worse, not better. Algorithms reward certainty. The angrier the framing, the faster it spreads. Nuance dies in the delay. A careful interpretation won't trend, but a decisive accusation will. So the system trains users to interpret aggressively, to assume malice, to treat ambiguity as evidence. And public figures learn the lesson fast. You can track the shift almost chronologically. Early interviews are loose conversational flawed. Later ones sound like legal documents read by humans. Jokes disappear. Opinions flatten. Every sentence is padded with disclaimers, qualifiers, and moral insurance. Not because people became wiser, but because the cost of misalignment became existential. This is where hypocrisy quietly enters. The culture claims to value honesty but punishes unscripted speech. It claims to value growth but denies time. It claims to value accountability but offers no path to redemption. Once a sentence is declared unacceptable, there is no after. There is only removal. And the crowd feels justified. Moral outrage becomes participatory entertainment. Anyone can join, anyone can screenshot, anyone can perform righteousness at scale. The more severe the condemnation, the more virtuous it appears. Doubt looks like complicity, nuance looks like excuse-making, and asking questions feels dangerous. But here's the part no one wants to admit. This system doesn't make people better, it makes them quieter. When the penalty for imperfect speech is public destruction, the rational response isn't reflection, it's self-censorship. People stop thinking out loud, they stop testing ideas, they stop experimenting with language. The safest voice is the one that says nothing new at all. That has consequences. Comedy loses its edge, interviews lose texture, public discourse loses risk. Everyone starts to sound the same because sounding different carries too much liability. The culture doesn't become more ethical, it becomes more sanitized. Meanwhile, apologies become ritualistic. Carefully worded statements appear admitting nothing while sounding remorseful. I'm listening, I'm learning, I take accountability. Words arranged to stop momentum, not to address meaning. Because in a culture where the offense was linguistic, the response must be linguistic too. But here's the most uncomfortable micro-hook. What if the outrage isn't really about values at all? What if it's about control? Because once moral authority is tied to language, precision power shifts to those who police language best, not the most ethical, not the most thoughtful, the most fluent in the rules of condemnation. The crowd doesn't need to be right, it just needs to be loud first. Time collapses in this system. A sentence from a decade ago is judged by today's standards, stripped of its moment and treated as a present tense confession. Growth becomes impossible to prove because the past is never allowed to stay past. Every version of you is evaluated against the newest moral update. So people adapt again. They hire speech coaches. They memorize approved phrases. They avoid humor, irony, and specificity. They speak in vague, polished generalities designed to offend no one and say nothing, not because they don't care, but because caring publicly has become dangerous. This is the quiet endgame, a culture that believes it is becoming more just while producing fear silence and performative morality. A system where saying the wrong thing matters more than doing the wrong thing, where linguistic perfection is mistaken for ethical integrity. And once that system is in place, the most radical act isn't rebellion, it's speaking honestly at all.
When you step back far enough, this isn't really a story about celebrities at all. It's about a society that has replaced moral thinking with moral signaling and confused the two so thoroughly that it no longer notices the difference. Language has become the easiest place to project virtue. It's faster to correct words than to change systems, faster to cancel a sentence than to confront inequality, power, or exploitation. So culture gravitates toward what's cheap, visible, and emotionally rewarding public condemnation. It feels like action without requiring responsibility. This is why celebrity language scandals resonate so strongly. They offer a clean target, a face, a quote, a villain that can be punished without cost. The crowd gets the satisfaction of justice without the inconvenience of complexity, and the platforms get engagement. Fan culture intensifies this dynamic. Defending or condemning a public figure becomes an extension of identity. Being on the right side matters more than understanding the situation. Nuance threatens belonging. Questioning outrage risks social exile, so people align quickly, loudly, and absolutely. This doesn't create ethical clarity, it creates tribal discipline. What's quietly happening is a shift in power. Moral authority no longer belongs to those who act ethically, but to those who interpret language most aggressively. Meaning is no longer negotiated, it's enforced. And enforcement doesn't require truth, it only requires consensus. This is how silence becomes rational. When every word carries potential punishment, the safest option is to speak less, joke less, and reveal less. Public discourse narrows, risk disappears, and with it, the possibility of genuine growth. People don't learn to communicate better, they learn to communicate less. The irony is sharp. A culture that claims to value marginalized voices creates an environment where only the most careful, sanitized, institutionally approved voices survive. Everyone else retreats, not because they're hateful, but because they're human. And this pattern doesn't stop with celebrities. It filters down into workplaces, friendships, classrooms, and online communities. People learn to self-police constantly, to monitor tone, to preempt misunderstanding. Emotional energy is spent not on connection, but on risk management. Language becomes a minefield, not a bridge. So the real question isn't whether cancel culture has gone too far. It's whether a society that punishes imperfect speech more harshly than harmful behavior can still claim to care about justice, or if it has simply confused morality with performance. Because when saying the right thing matters more than doing the right thing, ethics stops being about impact. It becomes about optics, and optics by design don't change the world. They just rearrange who's allowed to speak in it. In the end, the strangest lesson this culture teaches isn't about morality, it's about fear. We didn't become more ethical, we became more careful, more scripted, more afraid of sounding wrong than of being wrong. Somewhere along the way, saying the correct sentence replaced doing the correct thing because sentences are easier to audit than behavior. So we built a system where harm can hide behind perfect language while clumsy honesty gets punished like a crime. A world where people don't ask, did this cause damage, but how did it sound? Where redemption doesn't exist, only erasure. Where growth is demanded rhetorically but never allowed practically. And maybe that's the most cynical trick of all. A culture that claims to value accountability but structures itself so accountability is impossible. Because once the offense is symbolic, the punishment never ends. There is always another clip, another word, another standard update, another reason to decide that someone is fundamentally unsafe, not because of what they did, but because of how they spoke. So people adapt, they stop being honest, they stop being spontaneous, they stop being interesting, not because they have nothing to say, but because saying anything real has become too expensive. In the end, this culture doesn't reward virtue, it rewards silence, compliance, and linguistic obedience. And if saying the wrong thing is treated as proof of who you really are, then the safest version of yourself isn't the best one. It's the quietest one. The question isn't whether this makes us kinder, it's whether it makes us honest at all.